Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this weekly edition of the Duval Dive. Of course, I am Kyle Nash, the student of the game of Fans First Sports Network, doing the thing here. And listen, you could only do so much, folks, to try to win a football game. And while I'm sure a lot of people love the defensive efforts, I think we very safely eliminated the quarterback controversy, if there ever was one, outside of Duval County, or excuse me, if there ever was one within the conversation of the Duval Dive, is what I should say. The Emmanuel Ochos of the world want you to think so. The Kevin Wilds, perhaps, throwing shots at national media names, trying to make that was a thing. Do you know that people have actually asked me in Melbourne? There's a radio show going, shots to Mark Moses, about Mac Jones as a threat. What are we doing here? I don't know. I need some support. I need a personal champion. Let me bring in my guy, Big Cat Country Zone, Travis D. Holmes. I've been actually asked that question about Mac Jones previous to this week. Oh, there quarterback controversy. Whenever Trevor has had a situation where it looks like he's struggled or something. I
mean, folks got a dream, bro. Everybody got a dream, right? Like, the folks that work in media, they need this thing to be a controversy, because otherwise, what else they gonna talk about with this 2-win football team?
Well,
so I do understand.
You mentioned that there is an awful lot to talk about, and listen, we're at that point now where Travis is a hunter for Travis. If you're into drafting kids out of Colorado, which I mean, I get it, but I suppose it's the best time for us to explore with far more conviction than we've hinted in the past about Doug Pederson, no longer being in the ranks on the coaching staff here with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Duval Dive have sent their own football inquisition, if you will. And basically, if you've seen me put it out on Twitter, the whole part where a media member asks about what the intent of a certain play was, and he basically says, man, I'm going to tell you, you don't know ball. I mean, like, I know at least 40 people agreed with that sentiment on Twitter, because that's how many notifications I got about a like when I asked that question. Did coaches basically say we don't know ball? But anyways, I don't know.
Doug's always felt, I mean, to be clear, as long as Doug has been the coach here, he has been generally he's been a little bit more jovial, but he generally is this guy. A lot of people are just seeing it because of that quote, but for the most part, I've had this conversation with multiple people in the media over the past few years. Like, that's always been the understanding, is Doug don't believe that people in the media know football. He doesn't believe that there is this overlap of football guys or football ladies and ball watchers or true tape watchers and everything else. So he's, for the most part, generally treated most people like that.
When you think about some of the stuff you see in the Philly media, can you blame him? But
on some level, yes, but on other level, he probably, I have to believe he doesn't listen to a lot of the local media, because otherwise he wouldn't know that there's a boatload of true, like, legitimately certified ball watchers, tape watchers, ball knowers in this local community. And unfortunately, that's why that clip of his post-game interview ends up going viral, because, bro, a lot of us watch this. A lot of us know this. A lot of the fans, they are, like, truly eating this stuff up, eating up the certified tape watchers, the Ben Slovic, the Brett Colemans of the world, the Jaguars United, all the guys who watch the all 22s and actually know coverages and know formations, no checks, and understand this thing.
Good. I mean, listen, there's a reason why they invite you on, and you're about the only thing that improves their insight. So, shouts to Jags you there. I get it. I'm not going to comment on whether or not your appearance on that show, as it's been on occasion, hasn't rendered them a few extra, how you say, chat donations. I ain't mad about it. I'm just talking about,
hopefully, I hope to be able to bring something to the conversation, man. Now, but I enjoy just having those film breakdown conversations and everything else like that. But man, so Doug making that point was just weird, man. It was obviously like he was just irritated and just said the quiet part out loud. Unfortunately.
I mean, listen, and you've been in the room for it when it's happened during camp and things like that. Granted, things were not as woeful in Mudville at this point yet, right? But like, I've had good exchanges with Dougie P. I feel like I've asked questions, and I felt like he at least thought they were insightful questions because he gave me
Right.
good answers. Because Doug will dismiss you when you deserve to be dismissed. Who's calling the plays?
Oh,
And I don't, you know.
but that's fair. But at the end of the day, we are at the point. We are approaching. Well, I mean, I say approaching. We've been approaching. We're kind of
Right?
that. Yeah, we're at that point in a bad marriage or a bad relationship where you just can't stand the sight of the other person.
We've done the counseling. Okay,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
stopped buying the flowers. You stopped the subscription to the wine club at y'all's favorite place. Okay, all
Right.
that's out the window. I'm
Right, and we all know what this look like. You got. She still looks beautiful. She still looks sexy. She done walked out of the bathroom and just wearing her birthday suit, and you can't even look at her. You can't even look at her just because it's just like, ugh, I don't like this because I can't even talk to you right. Like that's where it is with Doug at this point, between the media, between the players, between it all. And this doesn't mean they don't respect the guy because they're obviously still fighting their ball, like they fighting their behinds off
Yeah.
for him. But it doesn't change the fact that, hey man, I don't trust you. I mean, obviously, I'm not getting down with the game plan, and I just can't. We can't have a regular conversation because you just simply can't figure this out, and you telling us we can't figure it out. But at the same time, John Shipley, Jaguars on that side, John Shipley wrote a banger of an article last year talking about it's time for Doug to figure out because you can't be this offensive genius telling these media guys that they can't figure out the concepts of this play. Meanwhile, neither can your free agent receiver, obviously, because
Mhm.
he sure as heck wasn't running the route in the spot that he was supposed to be at for
Mhm.
all of the breakdowns that we've now seen on that thing that was so complicated to figure out. Come on, man. Do better.
So it's with all of that loving feeling in mind that the Travis and I have opted to explore a concept. Well, I should say we have, but I'll pose the question so it'll seem more authentic. He said jokingly. The bye week is rapidly approaching after this week's battle in Detroit.
Yeah.
Um, in the event that, well, whether win or lose, the bye week is next week. I have a feeling the opportunity for all the firings that the Duval Devout, or rather, I should say, the Duval Inquisition, have called for,
Hmm.
if they're going to happen midseason, the smart money is that they'll happen after the game Sunday. I think that's a safe assumption, right?
I think that's the safest assumption you can make.
Yeah,
Uh,
because in the concept for those who are the more casual fan who would ask why that would happen that way, it's because then the new coach has an extra week to prepare, get
right.
acclimated, do what he needs to do in the day to day before they try to suit up and play in the next contest, right? So,
Correct.
with all that in mind, there's let me lead with this question. Let's start with Dougie P. Let's assume that Shad pulls the plug on that. Dougie P's out the door. Who would
Okay.
become the interim head coach? Because you and I have had the conversation that if Doug goes, what happens to Press Taylor is a very serious question. Does he go
Right.
with Doug at that time? I don't know that happens, but moreover, and I think the question we've both posed loosely, we can now basically kind of break that down. Doug gets fired. Press Taylor is named the interim. What really changes at that point this year? And how much do we really care, honestly, if there's a change? But how much actually changes? I don't think it's a whole lot. Do you?
No, I mean nothing changes.
Yeah.
Uh, if Press Taylor is then placed as the head coach, which also I don't see happening. I simply don't see it happening. I
Oh,
want I want to be very clear in saying that. But I've had this argument over the past few days on Travis D. Holmes on Twitter, on X, on Blue Sky, etc., all the socials, and that's actually been something that's frequently popped up as people saying, well, what happens to Press Taylor? It's a great question. We know that they are generally been handcuffed. They've been linked at the hip. Press Taylor and Doug Pederson. I mean, Doug Pederson was his first gave him his first big opportunity. He literally spent his entire NFL career coaching with Doug. So that's an interesting one. For well, I say his entire career. Actually, I take that back because he did have the 1 year in Indianapolis. Press did. Nevertheless, I wonder. I do have that question. Like, if you are an interim head coach, whether that be Mike McCoy, whether that be quarterback coach Mike McCoy, whether that be special teams coordinator Heath Farwell, whether that be DB coach Chris Richard. Uh, do you keep Press Taylor on if you believe that he can be his own man, who's not doing Doug's system, who's not following Doug's rules? Like, that's a curious one because we don't know what Press Taylor truly thinks. We know Press Taylor's good at following instruction, working under Doug. But if Doug's not working, like let's say Doug does not get another job, I mean, again, you've had Press Taylor working for the Indianapolis Colts, so
Yeah.
he's done at least a year by himself that had nothing to do with Doug at all. Could the man actually have his own thought process, his own scheme, his own mind that he's just not running his own system? And that's a hard one, bro. That's someone I literally have not thought about until just now. He might be
Well,
his own man.
and I think that's tough too. Like one would have to assume that Press Taylor, if he isn't gone at the bye week in the hypothetical situation where Doug has shown the door, at the very least you would have to assume he'd be out by the end of the year. I don't see a
That's
scenario
true.
where Trent Baalke, Shad Khan, whoever it is that's pulling this trigger, sees enough difference in the remaining, let's say, 6 or so games, right? To maybe this guy is all that. If they did, this fan base would lose their entire mind, and really, God knows what the players would say, right? You would have to think that their $275 million quarterback might enter the chat on that one. You know what I'm saying? So I
That's
don't
fair.
think he ever walks along with that either. I'm with all of that.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you obviously Press is going to go, but you're at that point, Press is just you're coaching for your next opportunity, like a lot of these coaches that would be here remaining. But to your original question, who's more likely to be the interim head coach? I'm probably leaning to someone like Chris Richard because I had this conversation with the Duval County Jacksonville Jaguars insider E Dilla earlier today. Eric Dilla. Well, it was Eric Dillard, we'll say. I'm not even sure that's his government name, but I'm saying it.
around.
And he was saying the same thing. He was like, "Hey, man, I'm hearing that Chris Richards is mad respected in the Jaguars locker room." And I'm like, "Oh, absolutely." I was having this conversation with Andre with Fox Sports in training camp, in the last week of training camp. I was like, "Dude, that Chris Richard is the kind of DB coach I wish I would have been able to play with." And you can see it; it's oozing. It's just the way that he coaches, the excitement, all of it, the clarity, and the conversations. Because I spend a lot of time over with the DBs because former DB, that's my area. And I've always thought that if there was an opportunity for an interim coach in this situation, I was always thinking it was going to be someone like him because he's already been a 2-year defensive coordinator in Seattle, and he's interviewed for 3 years. I mean, going back to 2019, he's interviewed for multiple head coaching openings. The New York Jets, the New York Giants, the Raiders last year. So he's one of those guys who's like right there uh, looking for that opportunity. So for him to be an interim would be an ideal situation. But you also have Heath Farwell, who's been a special teams coach for 7 years, a really dang good one for that matter. And then you have Mike McCoy, the quarterback coach, who's a former head coach, former offensive coordinator, San Diego Chargers. I mean, that's also a solid opportunity.
And I need to point it out before somebody else in the comments does, if they haven't yet. There's a very interesting name you've left off the list, sir.
A realistic one? All right, let's hear it.
Yes. And obviously, of course, I'm referring to Ryan Nielsen. No one's considering him, I think, mostly because, he's a first-year guy here, right? I don't, there's some others
Yeah,
there.
he's a first-year guy here, and his defense, while they were good in Atlanta, he struggled here. And you can't struggle for the first half of the year here and then have one good week and then end up being promoted, because then that just feels like it's going to be chaos with the rest of the defense, if that makes sense. Like,
Right.
I think he needs to fully be able to focus on the rest of that defense. You can lose a position coach and might be able to kind of make that work, but losing your DC for a defense that already is pretty religiously struggling, that feels like a much larger task that you're leaving these guys with
Oh, hey,
to try
but
to figure out.
if he's left as interim head coach, then we know for a fact fools ain't going to be rotating every 30 seconds. How about that defense, huh?
I bet they still do,
Listen,
unfortunately.
you want to talk about let a man dream.
Man, that rotation, but the rotation, it was weird. Now, can I just talk about that for a second? Because the rotation calmed down a little bit as far as the edges were concerned.
I was
It
gonna
seemed this past week against the Vikings.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed more like they treated Armstead like a legitimate rotational edge. It was mainly Josh Allen, mainly Trevon Walker, and then you had Eric Armstead just being your traditional rotational edge, getting 45% of the snaps when those other two guys kind of weren't on the field. But and then as far as your interior defensive lineman, it was for the most part it was Hamilton was your main guy, and then they just kind of rotated the other two guys. Like it seemed more reasonable as we're getting later into this season, and I thought that was odd. But then you look at the cornerback room and the safety room, and oh boy. They were rotating like everybody. If your name wasn't Tyson Campbell, you probably had 50% of the snaps, like across the board. That's what we were seeing with the defensive backs. And Ronald Darby ends up having a solid day, but he only played 49% of the snaps. Jarian Jones, 50%. Monteric Brown, 57%. Like they were just rotating those corners like musical chairs. But also a big note for me was Andre Sisco. This was the first game of the season that he hadn't played at least 90% of the snaps, with most of the games him playing 100%. This week, he was at 67%. It was more of a rotation between Andre Sisco and Antonio Johnson this past week, with AJ Antonio Johnson getting 45% of the snaps. So it was like, okay, is that going to be the thing moving forward? Are they trying to push Cisco out and move Johnson in? Because this was one of the best weeks that they've had as far as the Jaguars secondary is concerned. I mean, against Justin Jefferson and all, and and Jordan Addison, and you did that with Andre Cisco on the bench. You're talking what 33% of the snaps. That's curious. That's yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
No,
right, right. So that was a big takeaway for me from the Jaguars secondary, especially with the success that they had this past week. As far as your rotation is concerned, they rotated the front a lot less and rotated the secondary a lot more. And I don't really know what to take for it, but it's absolutely intriguing.
yeah, no, I can't front on any of that. But so let's take it here because we've kind of explored what we think might happen, and the Chris Richards take is very fascinating. You have my attention because a guy who's opting, who's applying, who's interviewing for an NFL head coaching position would jump at the opportunity, I would think, to be an interim to show what he's doing and to have testimony from players, who may
And
or may
it's a smaller impact. He's the one guy on that list that I named that will be the smallest impact on the rest of the roster, if that makes sense, to be the interim.
Actually, yeah, because if he's the DB guy right now, relatively easy to fill because most of the guys there are veterans. They know what's going on there anyway. Maybe Jarian Jones loses a little ground in development, but I'm doubtful of that being that big an impact.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll leave that at that. But here's the next question. The likelihood of Trent Baalke going in the bye week is low. I understand that. However, and the point's been made on this show, I'd like to reiterate it here tonight as we're talking about it. I feel like if you're going to jettison Doug and say farewell to the season such that it is, so too you must do the same with Trent Baalke. And I understand, Travis, we don't have protocol for the thing, and the guy's got to get the tapes and the scout. Sure, fine. But do you want this humpy bumpy hiring another coach and making another potentially first overall pick? And while Trayvon's worked out, the controversy swirling around the choice still exists. And we've on this show, this is a Trayvon Walker friendly show, I feel like, right? Though you weren't fond of the pick, I was less outraged by it, probably because of my distance from the Duval Dive, such that it is. I saw what the effort was. Now, this many years later, Trayvon is panning, having a career year in a year where Aiden Hutchinson is hurt, and but still probably would be producing anyway, right?
Right.
But you want Trent Baalke's hands in not just a first overall pick, but high draft pick in later rounds thereafter. Again, that isn't something that should excite a single member of the Duval Dive, right? Like this is something you should be actively trying to avoid.
I'm still having trouble with the Duval Dive at this current moment in time because I still have. I mean, you know me. I'm having these conversations with people over text, people in my family, friends, everybody. They know if I'm a Jaguar fan, so they're gonna talk to me about Jacksonville related items, and they're still having this conversation like, well, he did draft BTJ. To your point, he did draft Travon Walker. To your point, he did draft this guy. He drafted Anton. He drafted, and I'm like, bro, you want Trent Baalke hiring your next coach? Full stop. Let's just stop there. Like you and
You
I, Cal
only win
Nash,
the argument if you use
we've
that.
had this conversation. The argument is over.
Right? You know.
Right. The argument is over if you say I want Trent Baalke to hire my next coach. So you want the guy who hired in his past so far, Tom Sula, Jim Harbaugh was the only good coach that he's actually hired, and he ran him out of town. Chip Kelly, who was 2-14, Urban Meyer, 2-11 before he got fired, didn't even finish the season. Doug Pederson, who has a losing record, and just FYI, if you hold on to Trent, you're not getting someone like Uncle Ben. You're not getting someone like Ben Johnson. You're not getting one of these top guys. Point blank period.
They don't.
You're going to be getting one of those middle tier guys, a lot like a Doug Pederson, who was more akin to a Doug Marrone, and we had that conversation when he was first hired. That's what you're going to get. Your ceiling is going to be a 500 guy. And more likely than not, you're going to get one of those guys who have a lot of risk associated with it. So you can't keep Trent on for that reason.
I am going to ask you to elaborate because while you and I have had that conversation, we haven't had it on this show. So break that down, what you mean by that.
All right. So all of the coaches that I just named are under 500, including Doug, as far as Doug's career in Jacksonville. Whereas Jim Harbaugh was the only person that Trent has hired so far in his career that had an above 500 record, and he ran Jim Harbaugh out of town. What does that tell you? He don't play well with guys who do what it takes to actually win. He just plays well with guys he can control. And that is a different thing. If he wants this roster to be built in his image and in his eyes, but then what does that mean? Because we know you only care about length. If Trent Baalke worked at McDonald's, then his fry recipe uses great value salt, use oil, and it only cares about the length and the cost of the potatoes. Like he doesn't care about the quality of the food. All that man cares about is how it looks getting off the bus.
Potato salad and calls it a high draft pick.
Bro, that's where I'm at right now. So at the end of the day, if you're going to have this struggle with your head coach and your GM, you're always going to have that issue.
Well, I more mean the Doug Marrone part. Like, because we touched.
Well, the Doug Marrone part, because Doug Marrone was a real Doug Marrone was a good coach, and he was a great coach who could pretty much be guaranteed to give you a 500 record as long as you give him just a reasonable quarterback. And I do say reasonable because there are some. I mean, Blake Bortles could, it was a little all over the place, and the quarterbacks that we gave him that was very questionable with the roster that we was also putting around him. But he's a solid dang coach who's going to play some good defense. He's going to give you run the ball, ball control, play good deep. Cool. Doug Pederson is sort of that guy. Like his hiring gives you a floor of around 500, especially if you get just a reasonable quarterback situation. And that's what we knew as soon as we got Doug Pederson and as soon as we got Trevor.
Yeah, the thing we keep glossing over with Pederson's success is he did it with 3 Hall of Fame caliber offensive linemen in Philadelphia.
Also true. And so we've seen the 9-8, and we're like, all right, cool. Let's build up on that. We don't do that. 9-8. That's what we do. 9-8 is your ceiling with that coach, and then you're seeing a lot of what that floor looks like, especially when he is handcuffed to a GM who is also trying to build a team in his image. So you're not getting the best players, and you're forcing this coach who is probably going to be around a 500 coach to scheme around these incomplete, players. That's a problem. So don't handcuff that GM to your next coach because you've consistently done that. And that's why the Jacksonville Jaguars have the culture issue, the culture problem that they have now. And what I mean by that is they have a culture issue that starts with Shad Khan. He is the culture setter. I know people always say that's on the coach. No, I disagree. They say it's on the GM. No, I disagree. It's on whoever's the head, whether that's the EVP or the owner. In this case, Shad Khan is your EVP. Folks don't realize that.
That's what's interesting, too, because the point's been made, and I think it blew my mind most when Locked On Jaguars' own Tony Wiggins mentioned that how disembodied this head that is Shad Khan is
Right.
from the body that is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So
Right. So
the statement,
he's here, and both your coach and your GM report to him. But if both your GM and your coach report to him, and he don't know ball, this becomes the who can give you the best sales pitch while you don't even know the details. If that makes sense, like you don't know ball, to know tape, and know all these things.
details, yes,
It's
right,
about the sales pitch at that point. It's
correct.
about the flashiness.
That's why the Dallas
That-
Cowboys are in straight Hades, because Jerry Jones be selling to himself.
So that's my problem right now, is that the fact that you have a bad system. So if you as long as you have Shot as your quote unquote basically your EVP, you're going to have a problem. Your executive vice president, you're going to have a problem for Jacksonville. So they need an EVP, or they need to truly land on a dang good GM and hope they don't have to hire another one for 30 years. So that's why I'm like, no, they need to hire an EVP and make that the system moving forward, point blank, period, and then hire a good GM under that, and just let Shad just get out of the process, because you obviously don't know ball, and that's not a knock on you. That's just saying you need better people around you to kind of make this thing work, and that's all.
Well, I'll put it this way, and I think the point you best make is, if you're serious about finding a new coach and trying to establish a new culture, the way you send that signal is firing Shad Khan in that bye week, end of the season, whatever it is, right along with
Firing Doug.
Yeah.
Oh, firing Doug and Trent at the same time.
Correct.
I got you.
That's how you send.
Well, I mean, maybe.
So
yeah, maybe
it's a retool, so long as you have a quarterback as good as Trevor in the building. I mean,
right.
For as much as I've heard Kirk Cousins is a serviceable guy, please give me sunshine every day ahead of Kurt Thuggins there, okay? Kirk O'Chains is not T-Law. All right?
Right.
About that.
So, but yeah, so that's kind of what I was sensing at earlier. The reason we keep having these holdovers as far as GM is concerned, from Dave Caldwell to Trent Baalke, and the reason we're having these holdovers from Urban, and then we get the Urban Meyer situation, and then we get the Doug Pederson situation with the whole Byron Leftwich thing happening behind the scenes. Then you get the Mike Caldwell thing going to the Ryan Nielsen whole drama behind that. And because the Jaguars consistently, no matter what, have to point the finger at somebody. And that's what it is. It's always saying we're one player away, or we're one coach away, or it was all Luke Fortner's fault, or it was all we needed was a wide receiver and Calvin Ridley. But don't worry, he's already on the roster because I drafted him. Look at what I did. Look at what Trent did. And that's what it comes down to. It's always just, as long as Trent Baalke is your general manager, you will always be one player you'll be right around the corner from a championship team. You are the snake oil salesman. You are the preacher who is telling you your blessings right around the corner for the rest of your life. And if you go to church, you know what I'm talking about. You know that person. Hey, yeah, it's right around the corner, man. It was right around the corner 7 years ago. Ain't nothing happened since.
Plant the seed, brother Holmes.
Oh yeah. Let's go. Come on, baby. Oh no, that's what it is, bro. So at the end of the day, you're never going to land that.
I like how we cross demographic lines to illustrate the point of church and everywhere. That's beautiful. Man, listen. We almost 30 minutes and we haven't talked about the Lions yet. And you know what? I ain't gonna make you do it. Okay? You sold me. Tell the people where you can be found.
Hey man, all of my writings covering the Jacksonville Jaguars can be found at bigcatcountry.com. You can follow me on all the socials, as I spoke about earlier. If you were listening to this podcast, please like and subscribe at Duval Dive. The Duval Dive, we're trying to grow this YouTube, man. It's been a heck of a season. In spite of the fact that the Jaguars did not show up, we're gonna show up for you every week, dog. That's what we're here for.
At some point, it's about community, my man. You're right.
Exactly. And for the Detroit Lions game, we didn't talk about it. It is what it is. We all kind of have the same hope. I'm pretty sure if you are the Duval devout, you want the Jaguars to lose because you want to see Doug out the door. I understand, and you're hoping that Trent's going to be following them right along. So cool. Zadarius Smith was just traded from the Cleveland Browns last week. He's going to make his Detroit Lions debut this week. That's cool. So let's look forward to that 5-7 sack game. And their left tackle, Taylor Deckler, is trending in the right way per their head coach, Dan Campbell. For his shoulder injury, he may be returning since he didn't play against the Texans. And the biggest question I should say, is whether or not Sam Laporta, tight end for the Detroit Lions, is going to play, since he is currently day by day with his shoulder injury, the same shoulder injury that Trevor Lawrence has, the AC joint injury. So we'll see what's going on with that. We hope that he plays because, again, we know Jaguars struggle with tight ends. I'm hoping and predicting a Jacksonville Jaguars loss because Jaguars. But yeah, where can you be found, sir?
The only real question is whether or not CJ Beathard will start. All right,
Well, we'll always prepare like he's starting. Coach speak, filler, etc.
Yeah,
Where can you be found, bro?
That's so-and-so starting. I'll call it here. I have no problem being wrong. Of course, I'm Kyle Nash, the student of the game. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at the SOTG. Find me on Facebook as the student of the game. Check out my writings, not only for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but for the Orlando Magic, who I will be actually in the arena tonight somehow or another. I'm going to make that happen. But all that happening, yeah, we can find both the Magic and Jacksonville Jaguar coverage on Fan First Sports Network. Of course, the Duval Dive live will be Sunday. Granted, Travis is not going to the Motor City. We don't have that kind of a budget, but we'll still do a post-game reaction nonetheless to where Travis can tell us how excited he is to draft Travis Hunter once again. And then let's see what else we got. Also, the Student of the Game podcast immediately following this, depending on which YouTube channel you are watching, be it Sertoba Media or wherever. Also, my work with the Black and Gold Banneret. This week, the Knights football are off on Saturday, but I have been covering men's and women's basketball. I'm working on a piece on point guard Darius Johnson. That should be fun. Make sure you check all that out on the Black and Gold Banneret. Also, the Night Shift podcast as well on the Black and Gold Banneret YouTube channel and podcast, wherever your podcast catcher is. Yeah, man, I think that's all of it. So, on behalf of my personal champion, Travis D. Holmes, of course, I am Kyle Ness, student of the game. Until next time, everyone, class dismissed.